Chapter 7. Physalia Physalia. The silver-gray Mercedes S600 cruised down the freeway, traveling south. Alex was sitting in the front passenger seat with so much soft leather around him that he could barely hear the 389 horsepower, 6-liter engine that was carrying him toward the Sale complex near Port Talon, Cornwall. At 80 miles per hour, the engine was only idling. But Alex could feel the power of the car. 100,000 pounds worth of German engineering. One touch from the unsmiling chauffeur and the Mercedes would leap forward. This was a car that sneered at speed limits. Alex had been collected that morning from a converted church in Hampstead, North London. This was where Felix Lester lived. When the driver had arrived, Alex had been waiting with his luggage, and there was even a woman he had never met before, an MI6 operative, kissing him, telling him to brush his teeth, waving goodbye. As far as the driver was concerned, Alex was Felix. That morning Alex had read through the file and knew that Lester went to a school called St. Anthony's, had 2 sisters and a pet Labrador. His father was an architect. His mother designed jewelry. A happy family, his family, if anybody asked. "How far is it to Port Talon?" he asked. So far the driver had barely spoken a word. He answered Alex without looking at him. "A few hours." "You want some music? Got any John Lennon CDs?" That wasn't his choice. According to the file, Felix Lester liked John Lennon. "No. Forget it. I'll get some sleep." He needed the sleep. He was still exhausted from the training and wondered how he would explain all the half-healed cuts and bruises if anyone saw under his shirt. Maybe he'd tell them he got bullied at school. He closed his eyes and allowed the leather to suck him into sleep. It was the feeling of the car slowing down that awoke him. He opened his eyes and saw a fishing village, the blue sea beyond, a swath of rolling green hills, and a cloudless sky. It was a picture off a jigsaw puzzle, or perhaps a holiday brochure advertising a forgotten England. Seagulls swooped and cried overhead. An old tugboat, tangled nets, smoke, and flaking paint pulled into the quay. A few locals, fishermen and their wives, stood around, watching. It was about 5 o'clock in the afternoon and the village was caught in the silvery light that comes at the end of a perfect spring day. "Port Talon," the driver said. He must have noticed Alex opening his eyes. "It's pretty. Not if you're a fish." They drove around the edge of the village and back inland, down a lane that twisted between strangely bumpy fields. Alex saw the ruins of buildings, half-crumbling chimneys, and rusting metal wheels, and knew that he was looking at an old tin mine. They'd mined tin in Cornwall for 3,000 years until one day the tin had run out. Now all that was left was the holes. About another mile down the lane a metal fence sprang up. It was brand new, 20 feet high, topped with razor wire. Arc lamps on scaffolding towers stood at regular intervals, and there were huge signs, red on white. You could have read them from the next county. Sale Enterprises. Strictly private. Trespassers will be shot, Alex muttered to himself. He remembered what Mrs. Jones had told him. He's more or less formed his own private army. He's acting as if he's got something to hide. Well, that was certainly his own first impression. The whole complex was somehow shocking, alien to the sloping hills and fields. The car reached the main gate, where there was a security cabin and an electronic barrier. A guard in a blue and gray uniform with SE printed on his jacket waved them through. The barrier lifted automatically. And then they were following a long, straight road over a stretch of land that had somehow been hammered flat with an airstrip on one side and a cluster of 4 high-tech buildings on the other. The buildings were large, smoked glass and steel, each one joined to the next by a covered walkway. There were 2 aircraft next to the landing strip. A helicopter and a small cargo plane. Alex was impressed. The whole complex must have been a couple of miles square. It was quite an operation. The Mercedes came to a roundabout with a fountain at the center, swept around it, and continued up toward a fantastic sprawling house. It was Victorian, red brick topped with copper domes and spires that had long ago turned green. There must have been at least 100 windows on 5 floors facing the drive. It was a house that just didn't know when to stop. The Mercedes pulled up in the front and the driver got out. "Follow me?" "What about my luggage?" Alex asked. "It'll be brought." Alex and the driver went through the front door and into a hall dominated by a huge canvas, Judgment Day, the end of the world painted 4 centuries ago as a swirling mass of doomed souls and demons. There were artworks everywhere. Watercolors and oils, prints, drawings, sculptures in stone and bronze, all crowded together with nowhere for the eye to rest. Alex followed the driver along a carpet so thick that he almost bounced. He was beginning to feel claustrophobic, and he was relieved when they passed through a door and into a vast, cathedral-like room that was practically bare. "Mr. Sale will be here shortly," the driver said, and left. Alex looked around him. This was a modern room with a curving steel desk near the center, carefully positioned halogen lights, and a spiral staircase leading down from a perfect circle cut in the ceiling about 15 feet high. One entire wall was covered with a single sheet of glass, and walking over to it, Alex realized that he was looking at a gigantic aquarium. The sheer size of the thing drew him toward it. It was hard to imagine how many thousands of gallons of water the glass held back, but he was surprised to see that the tank was empty. There were no fish, although it was big enough to hold a shark. And then something moved in the turquoise shadows, and Alex gasped with a mixture of horror and wonderment as the biggest jellyfish he had ever seen drifted into view. The main body of the creature was a shimmering, pulsating mass of white and mauve, shaped roughly like a cone. Beneath it, a mass of tentacles covered with circular stingers twisted in the water, at least 10 feet long. As the jellyfish moved, or drifted in the artificial current, its tentacles writhed against the glass so that it looked almost as if it was trying to break out. It was the single most awesome and repulsive thing Alex had ever seen. "Physalia Physalia." The voice came from behind him, and Alex twisted around to see a man coming down the last of the stairs. Herod Sale was short. He was so short that Alex's first impression was that he was looking at a reflection that had somehow been distorted. In his immaculate and expensive black suit with gold signet ring and brightly polished black shoes, he looked like a scaled-down model of a multimillionaire businessman. His skin was dark and his teeth flashed when he smiled. He had a round, bald head and very horrible eyes. The gray pupils were too small, surrounded on all sides by white. Alex was reminded of tadpoles before they hatch. When Sale stood next to him, the eyes were at the same level as his and held less warmth than the jellyfish. "The Portuguese man of war," Sale continued. He had a heavy accent brought with him from the Cairo marketplace. "It's beautiful, don't you think?" "I wouldn't keep one as a pet," Alex said. "I came upon this one when I was diving in the South China Sea." Sale gestured at a glass display case, and Alex noticed 3 harpoon guns and a collection of knives resting in velvet slots. "I love to kill fish," Sale went on. "But when I saw this specimen of Physalia Physalia, I knew I had to capture it and keep it. You see, it reminds me of myself. It's 99% water. It has no brain, no guts, and no anus." Alex had dredged up the facts from somewhere and spoken them before he knew what he was doing. Sale glanced briefly at him, then turned back to the creature hovering over him in its tank. "It's an outsider," he said. "It drifts on its own, ignored by the other fish. It is silent, and yet it demands respect. You see the nematocysts, Mr. Lester? The stinging cells? If you were to find yourself wrapped in there, it would be an unforgettable death. Call me Alex, Alex said. He'd meant to say Felix, but somehow it had slipped out. It was the most stupid, the most amateurish mistake he could have made. But he had been thrown by the way Sail had appeared and by the slow, hypnotic dance of the jellyfish. The gray eyes squirmed. I thought your name was Felix. My friends call me Alex. Why? After Alex Ferguson. He's the manager of my favorite soccer team. It was the first thing Alex could think of. But he'd seen a soccer poster in Felix Lester's bedroom and knew that at least he'd chosen the right team. Manchester United. He added. Sail smiled. That's most amusing. Alex, it shall be. And I hope we will be friends, Alex. You are a very lucky boy. You won the competition and you are going to be the first teenager to try out my Stormbreaker. But this is also lucky, I think, for me. I want to know what you think of it. I want you to tell me what you like, what you don't. The eyes dipped away and suddenly he was businesslike. We have only 3 days until the launch, he said. We'd better get a bloody move on, as my father used to say. I'll have my man take you to our room and tomorrow morning, first thing, you must get to work. There's a math program you should try, also languages. All the software was developed here at Sail Enterprises. Of course we've talked to children. We've gone to teachers, to education experts. But you, my dear Alex, you will be worth more to me than all of them put together. As he had talked, Sail had become more and more animated, carried away by his own enthusiasm. He had become a completely different man. Alex had to admit that he'd taken an immediate dislike to Herod Sail. No wonder Blunt and the people at MI6 had mistrusted him. But now he was forced to think again. He was standing opposite one of the richest men in England, a man who had decided out of the goodness of his heart to give a huge gift to English schools. Just because he is small and slimy, that didn't necessarily make him an enemy. Perhaps Blunt was wrong after all. Ah! Here's my man now, Sail said. And about bloody time. The door had opened and a man had come in, dressed in the black suit and tails of an old-fashioned butler. He was as tall and thin as his master was short and round, with a thatch of close-cropped ginger hair on top of a face that was so pale it was almost paper white. From a distance it had looked as if he was smiling, but as he drew closer, Alex gasped. The man had 2 horrendous scars, one on each side of his mouth, twisting up all the way to his ears. It was as if someone had at some time attempted to cut his face in half. The scars were a gruesome shade of mauve. There were smaller, fainter scars where at one time his cheeks had been stitched. This is Mr. Grin, Sail said. He changed his name after his accident. Accident? Alex found it hard not to stare at the terrible wound. Mr. Grin used to work in a circus. It was a novelty knife-throwing act. For the climax, he used to catch a spinning knife between his teeth. But then one night his elderly mother came to see the show. She waved to him from the front row, and he got his timing wrong. He's worked for me now for a dozen years, and although his appearance may be displeasing, he is loyal and efficient. Don't try to talk to him, by the way. He has no tongue. Yerg, Mr. Grin said. Nice to meet you, Alex muttered. Take him to the blue room, Sail commanded. He turned to Alex. You're fortunate that one of our nicest rooms has come up free, here, in the house. We had a security man staying there. But he left us quite suddenly. Oh. Why was that? Alex asked, casually. I have no idea. One moment he was here, the next he was gone. Sail smiled again. I hope you won't do the same, Alex. T-Werg. Mr. Grin gestured at the door, and leaving Herod Sale standing in front of his huge captive, Alex left the room. He was led back along a passage, past more works of art, up a staircase, and then along a wide corridor with thick wood-paneled doors and chandeliers. Alex assumed that the main house was used for entertaining. Sale himself must live here. But the computers would be constructed in the modern buildings he had seen opposite the airstrip. Presumably, he would be taken there tomorrow. His room was at the far end. It was a large room with a four-poster bed and a window looking out onto the fountain. Darkness had fallen and the water, cascading 10 feet into the air over a semi-naked statue that looked remarkably like Herod Sale, was eerily illuminated by a dozen concealed lights. Next to the window was a table with an evening meal already laid out for him: ham, cheese, salad. His luggage was lying on the bed.